Hello, I'm coming to you live from San Francisco for GitHub Universe. Just kidding, I'm here remote in my streaming room in Ann Arbor, Michigan. This photo is from the before times. My name is Anthony. I'm currently a staff software engineer at Stripe on the Python infrastructure team. I focus on developer productivity, building tools, and software for other developers at Stripe. I'm passionate about code quality, testing, automation, and productivity, and maintain a bunch of open source software in the Python community. Some names you might be familiar with: PyTest Talks, Playgate Precommit, Dead Snakes, and many more. I also upload educational videos to YouTube several times a week, and frequently live stream on twitch.tv/AnthonyWritesCode, writing open source software. Alright, that's enough shameless self-promotion. Let's jump into the talk. Code quality. Code review is too late for code quality. Now, what you can expect from this talk is I'll go over some past learning experiences that I've had with code review. We'll talk about what linters and code formatters are and how they can help you focus on the important parts of code review. And finally, I'll show off some of the tools and services I've created which help you adopt better workflows. Additionally, there's some supplemental material available in a blog post which goes live after this presentation. Don't worry about copying down that link, it'll be available at the end. Also at the end, we'll have some time to go over any questions you might have. Alright, so our story begins when I was a young lad working at Yelp, and this was my first interaction with code review. Now, Yelp's process is fairly standard and straightforward. Generally, you hack on whatever feature or bug fix that you're working on, and when you're satisfied with your implementation, or you're looking to get some early feedback, you'll put your branch into code review. While in code review, your peers will look over your change set and provide feedback. If changes are necessary, one will iterate on those in a bit of a cyclical manner. Once everything looks good, according to the reviewers, they'll give the change set a ship it, and prodward it goes. Now, unfortunately, the experience that I had with code review was far from ideal. Most of the time spent in review was focusing on style things, usually nitpicking white space or quotes or other relatively unimportant aspects of the code review. And I thought this was how it was supposed to work, so unfortunately, I also adopted some of these practices when I reviewed other people's code. Admittedly, things were not well set up for the process to work otherwise. Yelp's conventions and style preferences were written in a canonical document, which everyone was supposed to individually learn and enforce. This multiplied the burden of style across all of the individual contributors. Now, I no longer work at Yelp, but I had a friend dig up some of my old code reviews where even I wasted time pointing out style issues. Fortunately, we don't have to spend time on those sorts of style issues because it turns out computers are really, really good at automatically identifying those sorts of problems. And if you set up the right set of tooling, you can push the burden of style enforcement from individuals to the computer. This frees up the developers to focus on the things that really matter in code reviews, such as architecture, design, performance, and other things. And these pieces of software are called linters. I believe the name comes from being similar to a clothes dryer where it catches little pieces of lint, which could have catastrophic consequences, a big fire. But I also use the name checkers or checks interchangeably, so you may see me use that terminology as well. These pieces of software automatically detect problems in code, and they can be used to enforce style as well as detecting some common mistakes or typos or other stuff like that. And what you can do with these tools is replace your hard-coded style guide and delegate the knowledge of your style preferences to automated tooling. This frees up the need for each individual developer to need to learn the intricacies of the style guide and instead allows a computer to enforce this for them. In many cases, you can also encode domain-specific knowledge into these tools to avoid needing broad education for each of your developers. The really cool thing I've noticed about automation in this respect is people are much more likely to listen to a computer than they are to listen to a human. Also, they'll get way less annoyed with the human. So not only is it lower effort to enforce style using tools, it also is much more likely to be followed. I also want to show you an example of where linters can improve reliability, especially despite adding additional process. And that brings me back to my time at Lyft. This specific scenario happened a few times, but I want to focus on one specific one where linters were especially useful as leverage. A code change at Lyft caused an incident which impacted customers. During the evaluation of the incident and post-mortem, it was identified that a particular code pattern had caused this outage. Since the pattern was easy to identify statically, additional tooling was put in place by way of a Flake8 plugin, Flake8 being a popular Python linting framework that I maintain. We were able to encode the problematic pattern as a lint rule and then prevent that class of outage from ever happening again. In this case, it was a particular misuse of an internationalization API. But what's better than linters? Formatters! Even though the human isn't telling you what's wrong anymore, it's still a little bit annoying to have a computer point out an issue that seems so trivial. Just please just fix it for me. A formatter or autofixer or fixer, I use all those terms to refer to it, is a tool which is similar to a linter in that it identifies problems with your code, but it also just automatically fixes them for you. This lets you lean even further on machines such that you can focus purely on code flow and let the formatter make sure your code is stylish. What we found works best is to run these sorts of tools as often as possible, integrating these into common workflows such that it's a natural part of the development process. Some ideas of where you can run these tools is directly in your IDE and get those nice red squiggles, or as an on-save action. Additionally, they can be set up as Git hooks to run as you commit your code or as you push your code. It's also a good idea to make sure they're running in some sort of continuous integration setup such that you enforce that they stay in tip-top shape. My final bit of recommendation here is to make sure to version the tools with a repository. That way anyone that checks out a particular revision will get a consistent set of tools. Now, I've actually written an open source framework to help you manage these sorts of tools called Precommit. Precommit is a tool for managing linters and code formatters in a bunch of different programming languages, and is the tool's written in Python, but it also manages a bunch of languages. It integrates directly with Git hooks and uses a small configuration file to version your tools. Now I'm going to jump into a small demo where I show you the power of Precommit. Oh, I lost it really quickly. Okay, so we're going to clone a repository that I've set up beforehand to hopefully demonstrate some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about here. So we're going to clone this demo repo universe, and this is just a small repository, has a few files. The files don't really matter all that much, but we're going to be installing Precommit and setting up in this repository. The installation instructions are on the website, so I'm going to kind of gloss over those, but I'm just going to run pip install Precommit to get going, and it's all set up there. Now, the first thing to do when setting up Precommit on a repository is to get a configuration. Unfortunately, Precommit comes with a sample config command, and this is, it prints out a sample configuration. We're going to write that to our precommit config.yaml file. This is where Precommit stores its configuration, and we're going to add that file to our repository. Now, this configuration contains a couple of things. There are some settings that aren't really shown here, and you can get more information on the actual websites. But it has a list of repositories, and these repositories are providers of linters and code formatters. This first example here is Precommit hooks. This is one that is part of the Precommit framework itself and provides a few common, language agnostic sort of hooks. And each of the tools that are provided also have a version. So in this case, we're using version 3.2.0 of Precommit hooks. This is actually a little bit out of date, so I'll show you a command in a second that'll help us get this up to date. And we configured a bunch of different tools here. So we have some fixers here, a white space fixer and well, actually two different white space fixers. We also have a checker. This is going to make sure that we're checking in correct YAML syntax, and another checker which makes sure that we don't add really large files to our repository. This also knows about get LFS, so if you're externally versioning your large files, it still works properly. Cool, but that's our configuration file. And if we are going to set up the Git hooks, we can run precommit install. And this is only needed once per repository. You'll see that it has written a little script to .get/hooks. You could also do precommit install -- hook type pre-push. So for instance, it supports a bunch of different other Git hooks. Now, I don't actually want to use pre-push hooks here, so I am going to uninstall that. And when we, oh, right, updating things. So The command that I was alluding to earlier is precommit auto update. That is going to bump those versions for us. So you can see here it took it from 3.20 to 4.01 automatically. And now that we have our configuration here and the proper version here, I want to show you how to run all of these tools. Now, normally these will run as part of your Git flow automatically when you commit, but sometimes, especially when adding new hooks, it's useful to run them against all the files in your repository. And you can do that with git or precommit run --all files. And this will install the tools if necessary. They were already installed here because I use this tool personally, so they're all pre-cached before that. We'll actually show installation of a tool later though. But you'll see that it has gone through the files in my repository and it's made some fixes. So I had some trailing white space in main.py, and the end of my files didn't have the proper new lines or whatever. And if we do git diff, you can see that it is, well, that's the version update. You can see that it's removed some trailing white space here, some red space, and fixed up the end of the file for me. So we'll do git add -u, and we'll do git commit and precommit. And that's kind of the basics of this, but let's take it a step further. Let's add some new tools to this. So if we open up our precommit config again, and we add another repository here, this one is going to be pycqa/flake8. This is again the tool that I talked about earlier and one of the ones that I maintain. Coincidentally, this one is also at version 4.01. This is a git tag here because precommit uses git as its lowest common denominator for distributing tools. And this has a hook ID of flake8. And so flake8 is a checker, like we talked about earlier, and it helps enforce some basic heuristics about Python code. And if we now run that, precommit run --all files, you'll see that the flake8 linter has pointed out some issues here. It says, E201, there's white space after a parenthesis. And if we look at the file, you'll notice, yeah, there is white space around our parentheses here. Now, this seems kind of annoying. Like, I could go in here and fix this, but I don't know. I'd rather flex something else instead that could automatically fix this. So we've added a checker. Let's add a formatter as well. And if we open this up and we add another repo, psf/black, and I actually don't remember the proper revision here. I'm going to add one in, and we're going to use auto update to make it go to the latest version because I don't have their git tags memorized. And it actually doesn't matter what I put here as long as I run auto update. So we're going to add black. Black is a very popular formatter in the Python community. It enforces a lot of the things that flake8 checks. So if we add black here and we run precommit auto update, that will bump our tools to the latest version. You'll see it went from 20.1 beta 0 to 21.9. And now that we have that, look at our config file here, you'll see it has bumped our version. We can now do precommit run --all files again. And this will still run our checker, so we still see the white space issues there. But you'll also see that black has fixed this for us. And if we do precommit run all files again, oops, you'll see that everything is green, which is pretty awesome. And if we take a look at the diff, yeah, we added those two tools. Oh, black also has some particular preferences about quotes, so you can stop arguing about that and just pick whatever your formatter chooses. But you'll see it also fixed this white space here, which is really awesome. And if we do git commit -m, add Python linter and formatter. Now I wanted to demo something else as well with our hooks. Let's say we were editing a YAML file and we introduced some sort of YAML syntax error unintentionally, like add a square bracket here. And if we went to commit this now, update bug.yaml, these tools will run, and we have a YAML checker in place, so it helps us prevent making mistakes in our code, which is really cool. Oh, I also mentioned the installation earlier, and I think I glossed over that when it actually ran because I'm used to seeing this. Oh, well, looks like black was already installed, so we get to skip that. But usually if a tool is not installed, precommit will download that Git repository and set it up entirely in user space, so you don't have to worry about managing these tools at your system. All right, cool. So that's the client side tool part of this. I also want to demonstrate the continuous integration part of this because I've also built a CI system based around this developer tool. We're going to push this up and we're going to switch over to the GitHub UI and take a look at that. And here's that repository that we just played around with. We've added a pre-commit config here, as a little bit of stuff here. We're going to set up pre-commit CI, which is a CI system that's based around that pre-commit tool that I showed you before. Developers spend a fair chunk of time during their development flow on fixing relatively trivial problems in their code. Like that really resonates with what I've just spoken about. But I'm going to show you how easy it is to get set up. We're actually not going to need any extra configuration. We'll just sign in with GitHub. Of course, I have pre-commit CI set up with a whole bunch of other repositories because I use it for personal development, but we're going to set up that repo we just pushed here. And that's it. Demo repo universe. Perfect. Now it's in this list, which is unsorted, but that's okay. We'll click save. And so that's all you need to do to set up pre-commit CI. And now I'm going to simulate another scenario where a developer is adding a feature to this. Maybe they don't have the client tools set up, and so they're going to maybe make a mistake because we're all human, so we make mistakes. Let's say we're going to add a feature where we print goodbye in here, and a few things are actually wrong here. I'm using the wrong quote type. There's actually some trailing white space here. It doesn't adhere to our style guidelines. And now this could come up in code review, but we have a much better way to solve this. Let's do this, add goodbye feature. And if we make a pull request here, our continuous integration system will run on this pull request. You'll see we've set this up and pre-commit CI is now running. Now it went red because we didn't satisfy our style constraints, but you'll notice that pre-commit CI has just come by and applied our auto formatters for us. And if we take a look at this, you'll see that we ran our first pull request here. It looks very much similar to how the local client tool looks. So we ran the auto white space fixer as well as our code formatter, and it automatically pushed those fixes directly to our pull request, basically turning our PR from red to green automatically. And that's kind of the magic of pre-commit CI and the entire reason that I built this CI system. It has some other features like it shares caches, so everything's super quick, and it'll auto update your configuration for you, so things continue to stay up to date. But anyway, that's pre-commit and pre-commit CI. Let's jump right back to our presentation. And actually, that's going to wrap us up for our presentation. And so now we're going to be able to go into some questions now. And if you have anything you want to know, some burning questions, put them in the chat and we will answer them.
Thank you, Anthony. That was so wonderful. I'm Virginia. I help look after the README project, where you can find Anthony's session, an editorial version that he wrote for the README project live right after this event. Looks like we have a bunch of questions coming in. So let's dive in. What if some of the tools conflict with one another? For instance, a formatter has strict opinions that is not compatible with the linter.
Yes, this is a common scenario where you have two tools that fight each other. And generally, if you're going to configure tools for all of your repositories, you kind of don't want two things that have conflicting opinions. So usually what you end up having to do is either turn off an opinion in one tool or drop a tool entirely. One concrete example of this is the default configuration of Flake 8 has a particular way that it likes space around colons, and Black, the formatter that I showed earlier, has a different opinion about spaces around colons. So typically you'll turn off one of them and keep the behavior in the other one. But yeah, great question.
Got it. So you recommend that every developer should find tools for one, linting, two, formatting, three, pre-commit. Are there even more topics you would recommend but didn't mention because of limited time?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like, you also have unit testing, you have, uh, automation tools, something that sets up your development environment. There's all sorts of tools that you would also want to integrate into your developer flow. Yeah. In this case, I was just specifically talking about code quality tools.
In addition to the vast number of languages already supported by pre-commit, are there any plans to support additional like C++, Java, and Kotlin?
Yep. So it's really easy to, well, it's somewhat easy to add new languages to the framework itself. You basically just have to teach pre-commit how the package manager and other language tooling works for whatever language involved. C++ is actually kind of an interesting one there because there isn't a super standardized flow for setting up C++ projects. But there's some plans to do like auto tools or something similar to make C++ work. There is actually some Java Kotlin stuff via the Corsair. I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong. Package manager, although it's slightly more for Scala stuff. But yeah, there is some JVM support already. But yeah, you want to add a language, there's a very easy contributing guide to pre-commit that walks you through how to add those.
Are the images on your back wall a commit graph?
So this is actually an art project that I worked on at a hackathon at Yelp. The idea behind the art project is to take any sort of file and generate colors, sort of thing. And I actually adjusted this recently to output just a single color and um, different heat map levels, and it's just random. But it could have been a commit graph.
Very cool. Maybe next time. Is there a way to auto set up new repos with the correct pre-commit hooks?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what drives the tools that are installed by pre-commit is mostly that configuration file that you see. So whatever tools that you have to bootstrap your repository, for instance, GitHub has repository templates. You would just add that particular file to your template, and then any new repository would get those sets of hooks. Uh, I also take kind of an old-fashioned way to approach this. I just copy paste.
Is it possible to run pre-commit hooks automatically on commit and also make the automatic fixes be part of the same commit without having to manually commit again?
It is certainly possible. Pre-commit tries to discourage this because auto formatters are, they're software, so they have bugs, and so generally pre-commit gives you a chance to validate those changes before you automatically stage something. You can, of course, bypass this. There are settings in pre-commit which let you customize the command line that's run, and so you could just run that same git add -u that I ran manually in the demo. Um, but yeah, it it discourages that because it's really easy to silently do the wrong thing.
Got it. If the code is formatted at commit time, wouldn't it make the commit operations painfully slow?
So these tools are usually fairly fast. Black takes milliseconds to format your code, and so it's usually not a noticeable amount of time.
How long did it take you to write pre-commit?
So the original implementation of pre-commit was actually written um, in college because I cared a lot more about code style than many of my group partners did. And so I wrote a little Python script that was kind of the precursor to what pre-commit is today, that enforced some white space fixes and some small stuff for C++. And so that was kind of the first version of pre-commit. That was around 2012. The open source version of pre-commit, which was originally open sourced in 2014, was put together as part of a hackathon at Yelp, where we basically went from the precursor that I used in college to a full-fledged piece of software. And it took 2 days to get the original version. Now it has changed a lot since then. Like it's a 7-year mature project at this point. So I wouldn't say that it came from nothing to what it is now in 2 days, but most of the basic ideas were there by then.
Looks like we have time for one more question. All right, we're going to go with a softball. Why is Umbreon your favorite Pokemon?
I don't know. It's cute. This is specifically a shiny Umbreon as well. So I really like shiny Pokemon. I collect them personally, but yeah, I don't know. It's cool.
Awesome. Well, we are up on time. Thank you again. And everyone, go check out his guide on the README project.
Thank you very much.